The day the shouting started, most people pretended not to hear it. That's how it always begins in small towns. Not with sirens, not with flashing lights, but with something small and sharp that slices through the air and then dissolves into silence because no one wants to claim it. It was late afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the sun hangs low and heavy over Main Street, turning the windows of the bakery and the hardware store into sheets of gold. Cars were parked at angles along the curb. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly. Life moved at its usual, unhurried pace. And then the voice came again, louder this time. A woman's voice. Fractured. Pleading. Across the street from the grocery store, near the old fountain that hadn't worked in years, a man had his hands wrapped tightly around a young woman's arm. She couldn't have been more than 23. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail that had partly fallen apart. Her face was pale, her eyes wide in a way that made her look both furious and afraid. The man gripping her wore a flannel shirt and heavy boots. His jaw was clenched. He leaned in close to her face as if the space between them belonged to him. A few people noticed. Of course they did. Mrs. Hargrove, who had lived in town for 50 years, paused mid-step with her grocery bags cutting into her fingers. Two high school boys, standing near the fountain, went quiet. A delivery driver slowed his truck, but didn't stop. The door to the diner swung open, and someone looked out, squinting, then turned back inside. "Take your hands off me," the woman said, her voice trembling but clear. The man tightened his grip. And then something else happened, something that small towns aren't known for. Someone spoke. "Take your hands off her." The words were steady, not shouted, not dramatic, just firm. They carried across the street like a line drawn in chalk. Heads turned. The voice belonged to Daniel Reyes. Daniel wasn't a loud man. He wasn't the mayor or the sheriff or anyone important in the traditional sense. He owned the auto repair shop at the edge of town, the one with the faded blue sign and the dog that slept near the entrance. He was known for fixing engines no one else could fix and for staying late when someone broke down on the highway. He lived alone in a modest house with a vegetable garden that he tended meticulously. He waved at people but didn't linger in conversation. He kept to himself. But he had been standing outside the hardware store when the shouting started, and unlike the others, he hadn't looked away. The man in the flannel shirt glanced up, annoyed more than alarmed. "Mind your business," he snapped. Daniel stepped off the curb and into the street. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He simply walked forward until he stood 10 feet away. "I said," Daniel repeated, his voice just as even. "Take your hands off her." There is a moment in every confrontation when the world seems to hold its breath. The fountain, dry and cracked, stood like a silent witness. The sun dipped lower. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The woman tried to twist her arm free, but the man's fingers dug deeper. "She's my girlfriend," he said, as if that explained everything. "We're having a conversation." "That's not a conversation," Daniel replied. "That's you hurting her." The words landed harder than a shout would have. They stripped the scene of its excuses. They turned what might have been brushed off as a lover's quarrel into what it was: a man using his strength to control someone smaller than him. More doors opened. More faces appeared. The town, which had tried to pretend nothing was happening, could no longer ignore it. "Let her go," Daniel said again. The man hesitated. His eyes darted around, noticing for the first time that people were watching, not with idle curiosity, but with attention. The high school boys had stepped closer. Mrs. Hargrove set her grocery bags down. The delivery driver turned off his engine. The grip loosened. The woman yanked her arm free and stumbled backward. Daniel moved instinctively, placing himself between them without touching either of them. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present. "You don't get to do that," Daniel said quietly to the man. "Not here." The man scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and after a long, tense second, turned and walked away, boots striking hard against the pavement. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting. The woman stood trembling. There was a red mark on her arm where his fingers had been. Daniel didn't crowd her. He didn't ask questions in front of everyone. He simply said, "Are you okay?" She nodded once, though her eyes were glassy. "Thank you," she whispered. Someone from the diner brought out a glass of water. Mrs. Hargrove picked up the fallen purse and handed it back gently. The high school boys looked awkward but concerned. The town, which had almost looked away, now stood united in the uncomfortable realization that they had nearly let something ugly happen in broad daylight. That evening, the story spread faster than any wildfire. At the barber shop, at the church, at kitchen tables. Did you hear what happened? Daniel stepped right in. I thought someone would call the police. I didn't know what to do. None of us did. But one man had. The next morning, the woman, her name was Clara, returned to Main Street. This time, she wasn't alone. She walked with her sister, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the storefronts. She stopped outside the auto repair shop. Daniel looked up from under the hood of a truck when he heard the bell above the door ring. I just wanted to say thank you, Clara said. No one's ever done that before. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. You deserved better than that, he said simply. Clara hesitated. Most people don't want to get involved. Daniel nodded. I know. There was no grand speech. No heroic music. Just an understanding passing between two people. That silence protects the wrong side. In the days that followed, something shifted in town. It wasn't dramatic at first. It showed up in small ways. When raised voices echoed from an apartment above the bakery one night, someone knocked on the door instead of turning up their television. When a teenage boy shoved another near the school parking lot, 3 students stepped in and pulled him back. At the next town meeting, a woman stood up and suggested creating a community support line for domestic concerns. For the first time, the idea wasn't dismissed as unnecessary. Daniel didn't seek attention. In fact, he seemed almost uncomfortable when people thanked him. Anyone would have done the same, he insisted. But they hadn't. That's the truth we don't like to admit. Courage is contagious, but only after someone dares to show it. A week later, the man in the flannel shirt drove past the repair shop. He slowed, staring. Daniel met his gaze without hostility, without fear. Just steady. The truck idled for a moment, then moved on. Power changes when it's challenged. Clara began volunteering at the community center, helping organize workshops about healthy relationships. She told her story, not to shame, not to dramatize, but to make it harder for others to look away. The worst part, she said one evening to a small group gathered in folding chairs, wasn't that he grabbed me. It was that I thought no one would help. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel sat in the back, arms crossed, listening. The town wasn't transformed overnight. There were still arguments behind closed doors, still moments when people hesitated. But now there was a memory stitched into its identity. The day someone said, "Take your hands off her," and meant it. It became a kind of quiet legend. Not the kind written in newspapers, but the kind told to children when teaching them about right and wrong. If you see something, parents began saying, don't pretend you didn't. Months later, during the fall festival, Clara stood by the fountain, now repaired and flowing for the first time in years. She watched families laugh, children chase each other, couples hold hands. Daniel passed by, carrying a box of spare light bulbs for the booths. She caught his eye and smiled. It's easy to believe that one voice doesn't matter, that speaking up will only make things worse, that it's safer to stay silent. But silence is a choice, and so is courage. When a town looks away, injustice grows bold. When one person steps forward, the balance shifts. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be powerful. You don't have to be perfect. Sometimes all it takes is 4 words spoken at the right moment. Take your hands off her. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that ordinary people can change the direction of a moment, then share it. Talk about it. And subscribe to this channel for more stories that shine light on the quiet acts of courage happening every day around us. Because the world doesn't just need heroes and headlines. It needs voices willing to speak when it would be easier to stay silent. The next time you hear something that doesn't sound right, the next time you see someone shrinking under someone else's shadow, remember Daniel standing in the street, calm and unshaken. Remember Clara finding her strength again. Remember a town learning, slowly, that looking away is never neutral. And when the moment comes, because one day it will, let your voice be the one that says, clearly and without apology, take your hands off her.